win, but his men were filled with doubt. On the way to the battle, they stopped at a religious shrine. After praying with the men, the general took out a coin and said, I shall now toss this coin. If it is heads, we shall win. If it is tails, we shall lose. He threw the coin into the air, and all watched intently as it landed. It was heads. The soldiers were so overjoyed and filled with confidence that they vigorously attacked the enemy and were victorious. After the battle, the general showed his lieutenant the coin. It was heads on both sides. How people think, their lives, their health, their relationships, and their environment is influenced. This is because thought matters. Let me share what the master says in Hierarchy, paragraph 172. First slide, please. One more misconception, often because of ignorance and self-justification, people think that their thought is insignificant and can reach nowhere, whereas the potentiality of thought is great. And for thought, there exists neither space nor time. But those who think chaotically are like those who wave their hands in the dark, unaware of the object they hit. Moreover, thought accumulates in space. One can conceive of a mighty choir of harmonious thoughts, but one can also imagine a flock of chattering black jackdaws. Such congregations also fill space and disturb the higher worlds. Dear thinkers, jackdaws, you are also responsible for the quality of your thoughts. Thus, even you create your future. People think that they can think here, there, and everywhere about this thing or that thing, and their thoughts are insignificant, which means that thought does not create a result, does not influence people, does not create problems, or does not create creative activities. But the great sage says that thought is a very powerful energy, an electromagnetic energy, which a teacher says releases every time a person thinks. And this thought goes and it sticks to chairs, to people, to walls, to tables, in space, in people's minds, and everywhere. It is something that a person must be careful about because every moment one is releasing thoughts. Either those thoughts are going to build something beautiful or they're going to build something destructive. The verse begins, actually, one more misconception. Actually, if a person thinks about the teaching and thinks about how to define it, the teaching is something that disperses the illusions, the unreality, the misconceptions, the misunderstandings, and establishes reality. The teaching is like a light, which eradicates misconceptions, misunderstandings, and illusions. The meaning of the teaching, the work of the teaching, a teacher says, is to create reality. This is so a person does not walk in the mist, does not walk in the fog, in the hallucination, in the phenomena. One will know that what one is seeing is real. Something one is hearing is real. Something one is doing is real. One's life will slowly go from the unreal to the real. So what are misconceptions, misunderstandings, and illusions? The teaching explains that there's some kind of form in our mental body that eats the reality and does not let one's body, one's mind, one's hands, one's feet to work through reality. Whenever a person does not work with reality, they are in danger because they're deceiving themselves. They do not have the right tools in their hands. They do not have right understanding. They do not understand about the need, and they are stuck in chaos. Excuse me. It's like the story of the traveling salesman who gets stuck on a lonely country road with a flat tire and no jack. So he starts walking toward a service station, which is about a mile away. And as he walks, he talks to himself. How much can he charge me for renting a jack? $5, maybe 10. But it's the middle of the night, so there's probably an after hours charge. Probably another $10. He walks a little further. If he's anything like my brother-in-law, he'll figure I've got no place else to go to get a jack. So he's cornered the market and he has me at his mercy. $50. He goes on walking and thinking, and the price and his anger keeps rising. Finally, he gets to the service station and he's greeted cheerfully by the owner who says, "What can I do for you, sir?" But the salesman will have none of it. "You've got the nerve to talk to me, you thief. You can keep your stupid jack," he says, and he walks away. Thank goodness for the teaching. Because the teaching takes a person's mind and puts it into reality. That is the greatest power of the teaching. When a person's mind is not in reality, they are always in the wrong direction. They're not successful, they're not healthy, they do not have right human relations because all of their thoughts are based on unreality. The greatest power of the teaching is to clear one's mind of misconceptions. Just think, if that man had the teachings, his car would be fixed by now. And one misconception that people have is that their thoughts are insignificant. The sage says there's two reasons why a person does this. First, there is self-justification. One says these thoughts mean nothing. I can think about them. I can play with them. One justifies oneself to do these things. Second, one is ignorant about the effect of thoughts. Because one is ignorant, one uses one's thoughts destructively and in such a way that in the future, a person will see that every thought they created became an obstacle on their future path. The teacher says, a person must think that everything they are thinking is important. It's important because it affects their health, relationships, moods, destiny, future, the destiny of other people, their health, their relationships, and right human relations. Also, thought goes beyond to space, and it destroys, if it's a bad thought, the rhythm and the harmony of the universe. One may think it is a little thought, but thoughts travel through space and time, whether they're good or bad thoughts. The teaching points out that there are no big things and no small things. Everything is equal to each other. A microbe is a giant. A giant is a microbe. There are no small or big things. There is only one measure. They're all the same size, but because of their relation to other things, they seem bigger or smaller. Here's a slide to illustrate. This is a well-known illusion in science in which two circles are surrounded by other circles. When the circles are placed next to each other, the perception is that one inner circle is smaller than the other one, when in fact they are exactly the same size. When I saw this, I even took a ruler and measured it because I didn't believe it. The difference lies in our perception. This reminds me of the parable about the 6 blind men and the elephant. Long time ago in a little village, an elephant appeared in the village, and 6 blind men wanted to know what this elephant was. So they ran down to the elephant, and each one touched a different part of the body. Hey, an elephant is a pillar, said the first blind man as he examined the leg. Another man who was carefully sensing the tail proclaimed, "Oh no, an elephant is like a rope." The third man, feeling the leg, screamed, "No, no, no, it is a thick branch of a tree." The fourth, feeling the ear, said, "It is like a big hand fan made out of leather." The fifth blind man very confidently proclaimed, "You are all wrong. The elephant is a huge wall." The final blind man with the tusk in his hand said to the others, "It is long, as you said, but it is far from being a tree trunk, and it is certainly not a wall. It is in fact a very sharp, long spear." Well, the 6 blind men continue to argue, each holding their ground and their own perception as the only reality. Thoughts are not big or small, but their quality is important. Lofty thoughts are constructive, creative, uplifting, purifying. Destructive thoughts are criminal, polluting, and confusing. Let's go back to the verse. People think that their thought is insignificant and can reach nowhere. But the reality is that insignificant thoughts can reach everywhere, and there's no time or space for them. The teacher says that every thought is an electromagnetic wave, which when it enters into space, which is an ocean of electromagnetism, it does so instantaneously. What happens? A person thinks about a crime. That thought immediately is gone. It may go to China, and some people pick up that thought and commit a crime. The person who thought about the crime is responsible in the universal computer for committing that crime because they originated the thought. That thought went and was absorbed by someone who had the same frequency or was very susceptible or very weak, or the thought was strengthened by an entity and carried over to that person to make him or her a slave of the thought. An interesting thing is that no matter what someone's social position is, whether they're rich or poor or high or low, Always a person can err in their thinking. That power is given to all of us to create thoughts, to think. Some people create fantastic thoughts. Somebody thought about this and it came together, and now we have that. If that person was 1,000 years ahead in their thinking, the result would have been different because their thought would have been different. Take, for example, the invention of the car. What a great invention. People for the first time could go far, and they didn't have to worry about a horse. Now, what if that inventor was light years ahead in his thinking? The car could have been made non-polluting. We wouldn't have needed gasoline. It could have been noiseless. It could have been safer. Here's another aspect of thought. Through the teaching, we discover that thought not only creates things, but thought not only creates the outer things that we create, but one's thought, it creates one's whole body. So not only creates things, it creates our body. Sorry. Thought is the creator of chemistry. Thought creates the chemistry of glands, the chemistry of organs, the chemistry of man's dense and subtle bodies. The source of chemicals is one's thinking. Think about love and analyze your saliva. Think about hatred and analyze your saliva. They will be different because thought is chemical. A few years ago, there was a report from a group of behavioral scientists who were researching the brain and its ability to modify and to change and to adapt, both its structure and function throughout a person's entire life. They concluded that negative thoughts slow down brain coordination, make it difficult to process thoughts or find solutions, that negative thoughts hinder creative ability, that they decrease activity in the cerebellum, which is what controls movement, and that negative thoughts impact the part of the brain that control mood, memory, and impulse control. Whereas positive thoughts, they found, increase mental productivity by improving our ability to understand. Positive thoughts intensify the ability to pay attention, to focus. They improve the ability to think and analyze and to solve problems quicker. And they enhance creativity. I think of all the collective thoughts of a person or a group or the world. And then I think about all the people who have thoughts that are filled with beauty and goodness and unity and brotherhood and compassion and service and sacrifice. The teacher says, if one can learn how to create and use thoughts according to cosmic laws and principles, one can create the most productive conditions in the world to nurture the happiness of humanity and the graduation of humanity from the school of from this planetary life. That is why it is so imperative that the science of thinking be the most important science taught to humanity. Everyone is surrounded by thoughts. Thought accumulates in space, on the walls of our homes, and the furniture and the objects that we use. Our pens and pencils have many thoughts stuck to them. That is why even today, people keep the pens and pencils of great people as an inspiration for them. Stronger and more elevated thoughts dissolve or transmute the weaker thoughts. Isn't this why people love to visit sacred places, especially in times of great worry or crisis? A friend of mine, when I was a teenager, when they were in trouble, in crisis, they would go to St. Patrick's Cathedral, and they always found it so healing. The peace and the beauty and the solemnity of sacred spaces like Isvara, our sanctuary, heals the soul. But then there are places where the moment you walk in, this feeling of unease hits you, and you can't wait to get out. Wherever one lives, one is surrounded by thoughts that were created by those who were living there. The great sage says that thought needs sometimes 2,000 years to leave a place. In olden times, people built new palaces for new kings so that they were not contaminated or polluted or conditioned by the accumulated thoughts in those old palaces. In King Akbar's kingdom, they always tried to destroy the old places or do activities in them that were opposite to the ones that were done there before. In this way, they destroyed the thought forms, and the new king could think without being conditioned by the previous thought forms that were existing there. The important thing is that thoughts are there. And subconsciously or consciously, they're influencing everyone. Slowly, slowly, they make one think in a certain way, in the way that those thought forms were organized in that place. Here's an example. There was a family who bought a house in which two insane people used to live. The family remodeled and changed everything and burned incense and did everything they could to purify it. But 10 years later, they noticed that their minds were flipping out of control. Thoughts slowly, slowly, gradually ate them up. Thoughts are energies, and they stick to one's walls. If one invites a guest into their house and sees that he's very obnoxious, thinking very wildly, very crudely, very incoherently, eventually these thought forms, like entities, will stick to one's walls. For a while, they do not resonate. But immediately when a person starts thinking something similar to those thought forms, these entities, these thought forms say, "Hi, we are here," and start influencing the person's mind. Imagine that the whole of nature is a computer, and everyone is in that computer as computer chips, acting and doing the same things voluntarily and involuntarily, consciously and unconsciously. Everyone is in that big computer. And thoughts go and accumulate according to their frequencies. For example, there are thoughts of beauty, thoughts of heroism, thoughts of sacrifice, thoughts of friendship, thoughts of goodness and joy and freedom. These thoughts accumulate in certain spaces in the universe. Evil thoughts accumulate in other places. For example, there are thoughts of war, thoughts of crime, horror, violence. Imagine how many are accumulating. Every day, some of what is shown on television, in movies, books, magazines, video games, are filling space with tons of violence, tons of horror, tons of ugliness and crimes. They are accumulating. Now, all people are antennas, and one can receive both kinds of thoughts because sometimes one is beautiful and sometimes one is ugly. One is catching everything and creating turmoil, inner friction, and inner destruction. But if one's discrimination is strong, if one's character is strong, they slowly, slowly cut themselves from that ugly antenna and focus on that good antenna that has beautiful thoughts. Once a person is hooked into beautiful thoughts, their life changes. Their life becomes beautiful because the reservoir of the whole energy is there according to their striving and their wishes and their desires. This energy is coming to them. Impressions are coming to them. Higher creativity is coming to them. The result, a teacher says, is that first one will experience health, happiness, joy, and freedom. Second, one will have high aspirations. For example, one will say, I wish that every person in the world would have food to eat and a place to live, that crime everywhere would stop. I wish that my body would be transformed so that I can serve others as angels do. This is aspiration. Then mentally, tremendous ideas will come to one's mind, but one must hook them. And that is the meaning of meditation. Meditation is schooling to teach how to think good thoughts. In Fiery World 2, paragraph 376, MM says, out of useful meditation is molded complete attainment. It is a joy when it is possible to refine one's thoughts. If a person meditates for 3 years, 3 months, 30 years, their mind will learn to think in the right way. From that moment, they will see that their life is becoming rich. Their family life is becoming rich. Their relationships with other people are becoming rich. The great sage says that thoughts recognize neither time nor space. The teacher says they are instantaneous. If I think something good here, it has already gone into your mind. Just think how responsible I am to think good thoughts. Back to the verse. One can conceive of a mighty choir of harmonious thoughts, but one can also imagine a flock of chattering black jackdaws. Thoughts have sound. I think about Agni yogis who are clairaudient, who can hear the thoughts of others. And I wonder how much of the thoughts that they hear on the physical plane are like chattering black jackdaws as opposed to a harmonious choir. If a person wants to be part of that harmonious choir, to have beautiful and creative thoughts, a suggestion from the teaching is to try to listen to one's thoughts and pay attention to what one is thinking in order to develop one's thoughts and have some control and mastery over them. One can ask when one is thinking, is it beautiful? Is it ugly? Is it real? Is it unreal? Or is it chaotic? Chaotic thinking is described as purposeless thinking, thinking without a plan. thinking without a goal, harmless thinking, contradictory thinking, selfish thinking, uninspired thinking, thinking without vision. These forms of thinking harm one's body in relationships and lead one to ultimate failure. Chaotic thinking disturbs the higher worlds and creates barriers between the higher worlds and our earth, cutting the source of supply of inspiration and guidance in both humanity and the universe. A person becomes cut from the world of beauty and follows ugliness. Any disturbance creates crime, ugliness, chaos, totalitarianism, and interference. Chaotic thought prevents concentration and continuity, and creativity becomes impossible. It is so interesting. For 10 minutes, a person thinks about beautiful things. For another 10 minutes, they think about ugly things. Now there's two kinds of chemistry going on in their bodies. How to minimize the thoughts that are chaotic and ugly and criminal, unpurposeful, contradictory, and replace them with creative thoughts, beautiful, future-oriented, harmless thoughts, inclusive thoughts, especially inclusive. Inclusive thoughts create the healthiest body, the healthiest group, the healthiest nation. Now, what about the influence of others' thoughts? How does the chattering of jackdaws affect our life? The teacher says concentration becomes difficult if those near them are jackdaws. The chattering of jackdaws creates the urges to fight. It leads to depression, to sickness, and argumentative behavior. It encourages a person not to think, but to be satisfied with mechanical thinking. It creates static in one's brain. It creates confusion and greed and great tension. Here's another question. How does a person protect themselves from ugly thought forms? The answer, by increasing one's good thoughts, by increasing one's reading. And immediately when someone feels that they have said something ugly, they can catch it and change it. For example, we say when talking about a friend, oh, that so-and-so, that just fill in the blank, right? One can correct it and say, I'm sorry. I did not mean it. He is a very good man. Now, the teacher says, one has started to become a conscious disciple. One is taking one's life in one's hands consciously and leading that life into future glory. And here's one last question. How can one protect themselves from the attacks of ugly thoughts? Thoughts are not necessarily aggressive unless one invokes or evokes them through one's own thoughts or behaviors. The ideal attitude in this world of thought is to have a mind that is devoted to great achievements. Such a mind will gradually tap the sources of creative thought in themselves or in the universe. Regarding this, a person must be careful when they contact a current of higher thought. They must try to keep its purity and try to translate it in the simplest ways. The originators of thought are thinkers who are impressed by powerful ethical impressions. They are cosmic, solar, and planetary souls, the initiates, and human souls. What happens after that depends on the response or reaction of the recipient. Pure thought needs a pure receiver. In thinking of how the Great One expressed the teaching, the simplicity, power, and beauty of his words comes to mind. As MM says in Supermundane, paragraph 150, it is impossible to grasp the full depth of the meaning of the sermon of the Great One, because he gave instructions for the whole of life in the simplest words. The key to this greatness was in his simplicity, which not only allowed him to more easily communicate with people, but was a beautiful way of expressing the highest in the simplest words. One should learn to make the complicated simple, for only in simplicity is kindness reflected. To conclude, one's future is built by one's own thoughts. Not only one's physical body, but one's future activities, future positions, future talents, all are built in little thoughts that have been accumulated throughout the ages. They become huge and influential and eventually show a person that whatever they thought, they are going to see with their own eyes. Again, we come to the idea that if one wants to have a beautiful life in this world, one must have good thoughts. Thoughts are coming from all people everywhere, from all initiates up to the hierarchy, from all centers of galaxies. These thoughts are all here, but they all have their own frequencies. They do not mix. When one raises one's frequency, one taps into them and receives them. That is the beauty. Dear thinkers, jackdaws, you are also responsible for the quality of your thoughts. Thus, even you create your future. This is very significant. Whatever one is thinking, that is what one is going to become. The Buddha said, everything is created by thoughts. One is created by one's own thoughts. Little thoughts over centuries, over millions of years, create what one is. The future is created by all of us. The future depends on our thoughts, because our thoughts are the soul of our future. Let me close with the words of MM, who said, whoever wishes to take part in the evolution of the world must understand the significance of thought.